Reactions are still trailing this week's report by the Nigerian Bureau of Statistics, which detailed a 6.1 percentage points contraction of the country's gross domestic product figures for the second quarter of 2020. The most plausible reason for this sharp decline, according to the NBS, is a massive disruptive effect of the coronavirus pandemic. Other interpretations are being discussed, but for more numbers crunching on this, we are now being joined here by Bismarck Rewane, Managing Director and Chief Executive Officer, Financial Derivatives Company Limited. He's also a member of the Presidential Economic Advisory Council. Mr. Rewane is a fellow associate of Institute of Bankers in England and Wales. Mr. Rewane, good morning and welcome to the program.
Good morning.
It's good to have you again on the morning show. Well, you listened to the introduction. We're going to discuss the National Bureau of Statistics report that the economy, Nigerian economy, the GDP contracted by 6.1%. Now, there have been all kinds of comments about this. Some people say we have even done much better than some big economies in the world, Germany, US, the United Kingdom, France. Well, is that comparison, reasonable? And then what measures should government take to prevent what looks like an inevitable return to recession by quarter 3, 2020?
First and foremost, let's understand the context of this conversation. This is not a race to the bottom. This is not to compete for how bad you are. Because the law of big numbers come in. One, in the sense that the bigger you are, the bigger the impact of the contraction or shrinking in activity. But let us look at it this way. One is the structural defects of the economy, which were there before COVID, the COVID impact, and more important, the resilience of the economy. So those are the ways you look at it. An economy that shrank by 6.1% in Q2, and as well, it had grown by 1.87% in Q1. So the cumulative contraction of the economy was 7.97% in the first half of the year. What is 7.97%, and what does that mean? The economy as a whole is about 155 trillion naira. 7.97% is the same thing as about 12.1 trillion naira. And guess what? Your budget for 2021 is 12.5 trillion naira. In other words, the level of contraction of the economy in the first half of the year is the equivalent of what the federal government is going to spend on the whole of next year. Now, how do you get out of it? Right, that's one. Two, that means that there was a structural defect. In the first quarter, when you talked about Spain, France, Italy, those guys had locked down in the first quarter. By the second quarter, they saw the economy actually, contract some more. So you had minus 20 in the UK, annualized about minus 10 in the United States. Now, when you look at that, you now say that in our first quarter, our lockdown was actually on March 30th, 2020. Now, so the lagging effect of it from a slowdown of 1.87 to a negative growth of minus 6.1 in quarter 2. I can tell you, we don't have to be a rocket scientist, that in quarter 3, there'll be negative growth. So technically speaking, we are in a recession, right? But the numbers will come out to confirm that later on. But look at this. There are 46 activities tracked by the Bureau of Statistics. Of these 46 activities, only 13 expanded. In other words, 33 of these 46 activities were contracted. But if you go back the previous quarter, right, we had 30 activities expanding in the Q1, and now we have 30 activities contracting. 66% of the total activity in the economy was expanding in Q1, and 66% of that activity contracted in Q2. Now, that is one thing. Now, what do we, the question is that we know the problem is stated there. We had economic structural defects before Q1, before Q2. Q2 the COVID effect manifested itself. And then Q3, the long journey towards recovery will start, but it's not going to give you positive growth. Positive growth is going to come earliest in 2021, and this is a reality. Now, let us now ask ourselves, what does this mean? It means that the policymakers are faced with four unpleasant scenarios, four unpleasant variables that are playing out. That's what we call in economics, we call it the quadrilemma. So what is the first negative scenario? The first negative scenario is unemployment, which is shown at 28.1, but it's much more than that. It's 40% when you take the 15 to the 35 age range. We have rising inflation, going towards 13%, and food inflation at over 15%. We have weakening external balances, that is, the currency is under pressure. And more than any, so you have inflation, unemployment, and then you have negative growth. So when you are dealing with these four unpleasant scenarios, this quadrilemma, you've got to decide what trade-offs you are going to make. And at the same time, you now have to boost economic activity, catalyze economic activity, stimulate economic activity, so much so that it will be a counterbalance to the negative momentum that you are seeing today. Because the momentum, when you go from plus 1.87 to minus 6.1, and the momentum continues, you are going to see negative growth, go on. But you don't want to be in a perpetual state, in what they call a languishing economy. That's what we don't want. We need to bottom out and then begin to come back up.
So, looking at this existing quadrilemma, as you have put it, what would be the catalyst for growth? What would recovery look like?
First of all, you've got to look at the activities that employ people, and you've got to boost those activities. You can't make omelette without breaking eggs. If you say you're going to be controlling this and controlling that, it's not going to work. Controlled economic activity does not work. What you want to do is to stimulate, and I'll take it one. All those areas, like manufacturing, like transport, like construction, and education, we've got to put money in those sectors. And we've got to stimulate activity, not just money. Because if a factory needs raw materials and they don't have raw materials, even if we put money, the money will end up somewhere else. So we've got to stimulate the level of activity, because it is that the national income, which is being said has gone from whatever it is, we've gone down by minus 6.1%. That national income has four components. It has government expenditure. It has investment by private sector like Arise TV. You have consumption, which is what after we earn our salaries, what we spend on. And more than anything else, we have net exports. When you look at it, consumption is weak because people are unemployed, people are idle, unemployed, and underemployed. Government expenditure is not enough, because look at the economic sustainability plan is 2.3 trillion naira, which is less than 2% of GDP. Investment is stalled because you and I know that private investors, both domestic and international, are sitting on their money and refusing to make any commitment. So what do we do? One, to get investment going, we have to incentivize them, we have to match fund them, we have to encourage them, and we have to do things that will make those things happen, because those guys are not investing. The government expenditure has to be complemented with policies. The policies we already have. Don't forget, the difference between 2016 and today is that in 2016, we're in psychological denial, in the 5 stages of grief. In 2020, we are not in denial. The government is stepping up to the plate. However, the dose that is being administered is inadequate, and is also, how would I put it, may not be the appropriate dose for this period, because this patient has moved from 2+ recession, I call it 2+, malaria 2+, to malaria 4+. So we now need, we cannot go through oral medication. We now need invasive medication. You need drip, you need to be hospitalized, you need to do everything. You need to stabilize the patient and then begin to treat the patient. So, and this time, it's not that one patient, all the countries in the world are affected. In 2016, there were only a few countries, oil producing countries, that were affected. Now we are all affected. But the good thing is that the country, the policymakers, the president, and everybody are aware. They're not underestimating this problem. If anything, They're probably exaggerating the problem, which is good. They feel that's a big problem. But now the steps are what form of treatment and in what dose are we going to do it? And that is exactly where we are today.
Right, I like your medical analogies as regards doses and treatments and the likes. But I want to talk about that same line of thought, the dose necessary for this. Others will say, incentivize SMEs. But we tried that recently. We sort of like gave out a bailout. But it didn't still do the work. Some said, oh, what we gave out was not enough. Some said, it could have been more than that. But another question is, where is the money? So for you to incentivize, you need the money. We're just talking this morning about Germany continuing their furlough scheme till 2021. They have what it takes to be able to take that debt and put the money in the pockets of people. But there's no money. So how do we incentivize where there's no money? This is sort of like a double whammy to me.
No, there's money. There is money. You can use the money you have. You can use your savings. You can borrow, or you can do a combination of all of this. But the point is that nobody's going to lend you money if you're not clear as to how the processes are going to be deployed and whether the impact is going to increase productivity. There's nothing we can say. The truth is that we have an underemployed population, unemployed population, and we have multidimensional poverty. You're not going to have shared prosperity. What we have now is shared responsibility for making sure that everybody comes out and does things. So let me ask you, if you give the SME money and he has to now import certain raw materials and he cannot get the import, or he cannot get the foreign exchange to import it, it's meaningless. There'll be a Naira illusion. But the good news is that the World Bank, the IMF, the African Development Bank, the Eurobond market, our reserves, right, and our oil earnings are all better. In Q1, the average price of oil was $64 a barrel. In Q2, it came down, the bottom it came down to about $20, but the average for the Q2 was about $34 or $35 a barrel. In Q3, where we are now, the average price of oil is about $44, $45. So compared to $28 a barrel, which is in the benchmark, we are almost 40% higher than the benchmark. But the production is down. We are at about 1.48, 1.5 million barrels a day. So we have, one, our exports have improved in price, while our imports have stayed this way. Now we got to energize the private sector. If a manufacturer, let us say Dangote, Flour Mills of Nigeria, BUA, Honeywell, and all of these guys, they need to have access to foreign exchange. Not just they need to have access to foreign exchange to bring in the raw materials, to jumpstart their activities, to bring their people back to work. If those people come back to work, then the consumption will increase. If consumption increases, GDP will increase. If the net exports increase, GDP will increase. If investment increases, and then the government expenditure needs to be targeted. The government expenditure cannot just be a series of palliatives and photo ops. The government expenditure, government intervention has to be there. But what is more, the complementarity of policies. Monetary policy complementing fiscal policy complementing investment policy complementing trade policy. And then we now begin to drive this. We have to get to the bottom before we get to the top. So I don't want anybody to be deceived that this is a walk in the park. No, there's hard work to be done. And you know what is important? The federal government, that is the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Planning, Minister of Finance and Planning, the Minister of State and Planning, the Central Bank Governor, the Minister of Trade and Investment, the Minister of Transport, the Minister of Works. All of these guys are all together in the economic system, and NNPC, driving these things. There's greater transparency today than it was way back. And I think these are the things that are endearing us towards the international community. Very soon, we would announce the package on electricity reform will be announced, I think, in a couple of days. And then the President made some statements yesterday on this. You will find that once the power sector reform gets going and money starts flowing in there in terms of meters, in terms of transmission, in terms of new transformers and all that, you will see the impact.
Okay, but what I wanted to just quickly add as a rejoinder was the fact that you talked about, borrowing. There's money we can borrow. We can still borrow despite the fact that our debt-to-service ratio is in the high 90s. that despite the fact that there's been back and forth as regards ministers and members of the House as regards borrowing and debts to China, we can still borrow?
Yes. It depends on how you borrow. They say there's a what they call a credibility deficit. There's a trust deficit in Nigeria. Nobody believes that government expenditure is not laced with leakages and scandal. So whilst they go through that process, the point is that this is not the time to argue about how they proceed. This is a time to deploy the resources you have so that we don't get, things don't go out of hand. Guess what? If we do nothing, we are guaranteed to go down to -20 or -50. If we do something, we will reduce the level of the rate of decline and face a turnaround, because you are not going to have a V curve. Let me not deceive you. A V curve means you go down very quickly and come back very quickly. That is not going to happen. Anybody who tells you that is joking. You are more likely to have a U curve, which means you go down, stay down for a while, and for a long while, and then come back up. But more important and more threatening is what we call a W curve, which means you go down, you pretend to come up, then you have rising infections. In two days ago, we had 401 new infections, and we are testing only a few. And they say 60% of those guys came from abroad. Yeah, whether they came from abroad or came from Mars or came from Ghana, the point is that we're having rising infections. If you have rising infections, and then we have to go into the next stage, which is what they call precision lockdown, then you will find out that you will go down, and then you go down again. The W means that you go down, you stay down there, and you will find it very difficult to come out. So now we've got to combine, that is, muster all our resources to deal with borrowing 1, 2, savings, 3, efficient deployment of resources. So even if you borrow and deploy it wrongly, you will end up in the same outcome. So efficient deployment of resources, and put the best hands in charge of things, and ensure that, those companies get back to producing and employing people, that consumption starts because people are engaged in, people who are employed are now spending money. Government expenditure is targeted at completing projects, not just, we could be a perpetual Lagos to Ibadan expressway, which will never be completed, and that will achieve no productivity. Or go ahead and complete it. Get the Lagos-Ibadan rail, a Takpe Abuja rail, get it going, and let it finish in 2-3 months. These things can be finished in 2-3 months. So let the minister do nothing else but just to go and complete the 2-3 projects and work on the site. And I think the ministers can do that. So when you do that, you'll get productivity, you'll get investment, you'll get consumption, and then, of course, the result is that you'll have national income growing again. And that is what we want to accomplish.
Well, Mr. Arewane, let's move on to the CBN and the 2 major policy announcements that the Central Bank of Nigeria made in the last few days. But first, let's start with the directive of the CBN with regard to forex abuse and over-invoicing through the manipulation of the Form M through third parties and agents. What do you think of that intervention? We had a guest here yesterday, Johnson Chukwu, who was saying that, look, the CBN is even just trying to deal with the symptom of a more serious problem, that the CBN should, first of all, eliminate the incentive for over-invoicing, and that unless they do that, they're just still joking. This morning, in the front page of This Day, we're told that the CBN is going to unveil and prosecute companies for FX abuse. Do you think that the CBN governor will be able to summon the courage to do that beyond this announcement, considering the fact that when the perpetrators of over-invoicing, when they are unveiled, they are probably owners of companies at the commanding heights of the Nigerian economy, and they do have a lot of influence?
Well, I couldn't agree more with Johnson Chukwu. You see, when you have a market imperfection, the gaps will be created and the gaps will be abused. So why don't you just remove that? There was a time when in this country where having $10 in your pocket was a crime and you were sentenced to 5 years imprisonment. It was called the Foreign Exchange Anti-Sabotage Decree. It achieved nothing. It's only when we liberalize the markets, when we allow the exchange rate to move in unison with market-determined forces, that we got some sanity. Now, here we go again. Quite frankly, anybody who abuses the law should be brought to justice. But why do you? There are laws like you are not allowed to drive without your seatbelt. You are not allowed to. You are not allowed to smoke while driving. You are not allowed to do this. You are not. As a matter of fact, you know you are not supposed to use your generator without running it through your meter. But everybody is doing that in this. So if we want to go out there and do that, you can do that. But it will not solve the problem. We already have what they call the pre-shipment inspection rules that determines the origin and value and all of that goes with shipment. Whether you buy directly from the exporter can add 10% or 20% and then will give you the money back in dollars and you bring the dollars back to come and sell at 475. As long as there's 475 and 380, people will do that. They use their ATM cards to go and draw money in Lome and brought it back to come and sell in this market. How long are you going to spend chasing these shadows? The truth is that when you make that adjustment and the gap between the true market and the effective market, if those narrow, then there'll be no incentive. You said it already. We know that. I fully support what the central bank is trying to accomplish. But I find it difficult as an economist to believe that price controls will work. We had national supply company in this country for essential commodities. Did they work? They did not work. We had marketing boards. Did they work? They did not work. So going in 2020 to be talking about that is a bit, to me, extremely, I would call it difficult to fathom how it will succeed. Let us look at let me tell you how it will succeed. If you adjust the exchange rate to a particular level to bring the gap between the PPP value of the naira and you disburse tomorrow, if you disburse $3-4 billion tomorrow to manufacturers, nobody will have that $4 billion will take about almost 2 trillion naira out of the economy at, let's say, for sake of argument, let us say 410, right? Where will they find the naira to go and buy the extra dollars in the parallel market? It happened in 2008 when Charles Soludo was the governor of the central bank. They moved from 118 to 155. For about 4 or 5 weeks, if not longer, people were buying money in the parallel market to come and sell to the central bank. The official rate was higher than the parallel market rate. And then the market corrected and we saw that stability for a long time. So if you make that adjustment, 1, 2, you now begin to adjust periodically, right? I mean, let's say every week or every 2 weeks, at times it will appreciate, at times it will depreciate. Currency markets by nature are volatile. So currency market volatility is not an unnatural phenomenon. And so let us not spend our resources trying to control the demand. What we should do is to make sure that the price mechanism allows it to be allocated. If it's too expensive, I will not go anywhere. This same country people are talking about for the past 4 or 5 months, how many people have traveled out of the country? If, for example, the federal government said, no, we are banning travel for 5 months in this country, there would have been riots all over the place. I said, but these same people, because of COVID, which is not a government, all of them have stayed in their houses. The entire civil service of this country, level 1 to 13, are still at home since April 1, and the country continued. So it's an emergency. So there are certain things we have to do. I am saying that if in the emergency we move our currency, the US dollar has actually lost about almost 10 to 11% over the last 1 year compared to the euro and compared to the basket of currencies. The British pound, after Brexit, went from 1.58 to $1.58 to a pound, all the way to 1.18. It lost over 40%. Britain continued. Now it has come all the way back to 1.31. So my hypothesis is that if you adjust the currency, change the mechanism to determine the fair value of the currency on a consistent basis, we will not be talking about currency. We'll be talking about productivity. Because the problem today is not about currency, it's about productivity. Productivity is a function of activity. And activity is a function of the availability of foreign exchange at whatever price, right? So when we get there, we'll do that. And so once those companies are producing, those companies, the shops will be full. If they have no money to buy, they don't buy. And people adjust accordingly. That is what is happening.
We've seen these restrictive measures to Forex by the CBN to prevent depletion of the reserves, but they don't seem to be working. What is the CBN doing wrongly? And you talked about price mechanism. Are you surprised that we're just talking about product price verification mechanism at a time like this? Many say, this is something we should have had a long time ago.
Why do you want to verify? Okay, I agree that you go through that process. But that's not, the problem is not price verification. You already have what they call pre-shipment inspection. The pre-shipment inspection gives you a certificate of origin and value. And we pay, mind you, we pay for this. So SGF and all those other guys who do all of these things, we have them. Then we will have another set of people who will do price verification of the imports. If I bring my imports in and I over-invoice it, and somebody else is efficient under-invoices, my prices will be higher than his. The marketplace will discipline me. If I bring my Mercedes-Benz and sell it at 80 million, and you bring in the same Mercedes-Benz because you are bringing it, and you sell it at 40 million, everybody will come to me and you'll be out of business. It is not, the policing of the markets has been tried everywhere. In Russia, in the Soviet Union before, in Russia, they do not work. You try it, after a while, people will find a way around it. They found a way around it. People were smuggling petrol out of the border. They closed the borders, people still smuggled things around the border. So for the first 2 months, they said, oh, no, yes, we came down to 30 million liters a day. Guess what? We are back to 58 million liters a day because of the differential. But the moment we started moving from 125 to 148.7 and narrowing the differential between the price of petrol in Cotonou and Cameroon and ourselves, we started seeing some semblance of stability. Market forces work. Market forces work. Policing markets do not work. You can try it for some time, you get a minimum success to do it. So my point of view is that let's try it, but let us be ready that if it doesn't work, we will go back to the market forces which will work. And then you will see that, like I said at the beginning, this is not a allocation problem. This is a problem of productivity. Productivity is a function of what? Activity, consumption, power, and making sure that people can get to work. We need to get people back to work. The Bureau of Statistics data shows that 43% of urban Nigerians are idle, underemployed, and unemployed. That's what you need to worry about.
Okay, I mean, you've been able to talk very strongly about leaving market forces to work, but there's many things for the market forces to work in favor of Nigeria, as regards the currency, as regards, every area of the economy. One very important thing to make all of this work for us is the willingness to come together. You spoke about this at first. You said investment policies, monetary policies, and the like is the intermingling of all these, factors or variables that make up these policies. But we have not done that very well enough in this country. What can we do differently now to make investment policy work, to make market policies work, to make monetary policy work, to make fiscal policy work? Who needs to bring everybody together? Take, for instance, you're part of the Presidential Advisory Council. The Vice President still chairs another Economic Council on the economy. Who needs to bring all these bodies together to make it work?
Well, the question of coordination, control, and effectiveness of policy, I don't agree with you that there is coordination taking place. There is sequencing. The Economic Sustainability Plan feeds into the Economic Growth and Recovery Plan, and that feeds into the long-term 10-year plan for the country. But you see, you are dealing with an emergency. If there's an accident somewhere, and you bring the person in, the person goes to ER, emergency room. While the people in the surgery department are preparing for the patient after he has stabilized, the people in the ER are actually stopping his bleeding, preparing him, taking his vitals, and then deciding whether he will be in a waiting room before. And then immediately after the surgery, he goes into what they call the ICU, no, not ICU, what they call the post-surgical procedures for where you wait, and then before you recover, before you go back to the ward. So you have to look at Nigeria like other countries, there was an accident. COVID was an accident. We hit it. We have moved into the ER room, and now somebody has come out and said, well, Nigeria is in emergency room, but thank God we contracted by -6.1. We are preparing ourselves to go into surgery. But before surgery, they say, look, you must feed a bit, you must build up his hemoglobin, you must build this, you must build that. That is where we are. So the coordination, people are waiting to bring their money in. People are waiting to invest their money. But they want to see that stabilization and want to see that the policies that we are implementing in the emergency room are complementary and are not going to cannibalize or compromise the patient's immunity when he goes into the surgery. If not, the result will be fatal. So that is what I want you to see. And the country has tried, because, like I said, in 2016, we went to a recession, and it was a limited recession, and we had 6 quarters. Today, the reason why your recession is not going to last too long is because, 1, the policymakers are not in denial. 2, they are willing to work together. And 3, there's complementary policies. That is, whatever the central bank is doing is being complemented by the Ministry of Finance. Whatever the Ministry of Finance is doing is being complemented by the Ministry of Trade. Whatever the Ministry of Trade is being complemented by the Vice President's office. And all of this comes under the umbrella of the President, who takes full responsibility for all of these things. So, yes, there are arguments about which is the most effective and which is the better way to go. But the objective of making sure that the country's economic growth is, 1, accelerated, 2, sustainable, and 3, impactful on people. Those goals are not in question. The President, the Central Bank, the Minister of Finance, the Minister of Planning, all of these guys are working towards the same objective, but they may have different paths to the same objective. It doesn't matter whether the cat is black or the cat is white. As long as it kills mouse, it's a cat.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Bismarck Rewane, for joining us this morning on The Morning Show. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you.